Welcome to another Bandology interview. Bandology is a Canadian nonprofit dedicated to more music for more kids via education, collaboration, and community.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Bandology's podcast, What's Your Forte? As always, my name's Sandy Wright, and today I have the wonderful pleasure of welcoming Amanda Kind, singer, educator, businesswoman, all sorts of wonderful things that she's going to tell you about today. And I'm very excited to have you on. Welcome.
Thanks, Sandy. I really appreciate the welcome. I'm excited to be here.
First off, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do in music, because there's a lot of stuff that you do in music, and sort of like what your sort of passions are.
Well, my passion has always been singing, and so that's the root of everything. I do a variety of things. So I'm the artistic director for a group called Glee, which operates multiple choral ensembles in Waterloo region for various ages. So we have 4 different levels of programs. So everything from little kids, which we call our Glee minis, grades 1, 2, and 3. And then our junior group, which is grades 4 to 8. And then the teenager group, which is grades 9 to first year university. And then an adult group called Pop Therapy. And so I oversee the staff for that organization, and I am directly teaching 2 of those groups. So I teach the senior teenager group, and I also teach the adult pop therapy group.
Nice.
Yeah.
You do some creative music stuff too. You record, right?
I do. So that's kind of one side to my life. I have kind of 2 or 3 days a week that are devoted to doing things for KW Glee. And then I teach at Laurier. So I have a class that I teach at Wilfrid Laurier, and I'm also a student there right now. So that's a real beautiful reminder of what it means to be a student. I've said this to a few people, but on my Wednesdays, I take a class myself as a student from 12:30 to 3:30. And then I teach a class as a teacher from 4 to 6. And then I go and take an evening class from 7 to 10 as a student. So there's a beautiful reminder to me of what it feels like to be in a room where you're not in control, which has been a real beautiful awakening for me this fall. And then I have private clients that I teach as a voice teacher. So everything from professional musical theater artists to indie and label signed artists who are creating their own music. And then outside of that, I am a country singer and sing, produce and write and release country music. And so it's a nice variety of things. And I say that because I'm somebody who really needs a lot of different variety in my life to feel challenged and excited by the work. And so it sounds maybe chaotic to some ears, but for me, it is nice to be able to shift gears all the time and flex different skills. I spent a lot of time prior to my teaching life at Laurier as the director of marketing at Drayton Entertainment, which is one of the biggest theater companies in Canada. And so I had many years in the business world, entertainment, the business side of show business. And those skills kind of follow me around as I'm entering different spaces in more of an educational capacity. And it's a career that I really loved and had a very hard time leaving. So there's certain amounts of arts marketing that I do in my life as well, part of my artistic director job and just part of my job as an artist.
That's a really wide variety of things. And that's really the marketing thing, I think, is so interesting for me because it's one of those entrepreneurial skills, and those kind of like actual like business skills are so important to making a career in music. And that's something that doesn't always get super well addressed when you're studying it, either just in private lessons or in an educational institution. And I know there's a lot of schools who are like making that shift. I know Laurier is one of them, which is really nice to see. And I just wish they'd done it 10 years ago when I was applying for school.
I won't lie, that skill has been very beneficial to me as an artist. You know, part of my job when I worked at Drayton was a lot of data analysis. So there are 2 really important things in marketing. Understanding your audience and, finding out what they like and how they buy. And then looking at the data and understanding how it informs you. And so those 2 elements are key elements that come with me in almost every space that I'm in. Like even when I'm teaching a private client, there's the history of teaching music lessons has changed so much over the years. And there was a lot for many, many years. It was very much a master and apprentice relationship. And I don't teach that way and don't really believe in teaching that way. My private clients, especially, are my clients, and it's my job to understand what they want and what they're looking for and to help them get it. And so there's much more of a collaborative approach to how I teach, because making them happy and having them see results the same way a client would in a marketing relationship, it is the basis, the underpinning for how I'm doing my job. And I've experienced multiple different kinds of teaching in my vocal growth. And I will say that the teachers that treated me more like someone they wanted to collaborate with and really wanted to understand my personal goals were people who I just connected with more, and frankly, whose approach helped me grow a bit more, because it was much more centered in what I was looking to do versus what they thought that I should do. And so that marketing element just plays into that voice teaching for me in that way, in that I treat my students, so to speak, as a client whose needs need to be met.
Yeah. No, that's a really interesting way of sort of coming to that sort of like perspective, specifically just through the business side, because I know that's something that I've come to in a different direction, which is I really hated when teachers talk down to me, and I'm like, I can't do that to an 8-year-old.
Right.
It's like a different sort of way of navigating it. It's also something that I find is really interesting, because I talk to a lot of vocal teachers. I have vocal teachers who are friends. That entrepreneurial thing and that sort of paying attention to the client, air quotes, / students' needs is much more prominent with them. I think it's also, I find vocal teachers have a lot older students. Generally, they have a lot more teenagers and a lot more adults. Again, this is my anecdotal experience. Then they have 8-year-olds who never touched an instrument before and have sort of got stuck here because their parents were like, you should take piano lessons, which is my experience. So I think it's a really interesting, but for me, it's a challenge to like, how do I get the kids to like see that and actually tell me what they want out of the lessons? And it's really rewarding when I actually get a kid to sort of tell me, I kind of want to do this, and go, okay, so we're going to do that and we'll figure out how to do it. And that check-in's kind of hard.
Well,
But
and
yeah,
I would offer that, like, we still have students like that in the older ages. It's just that instead of immediately deciding what they should do, I think we're now in the position of mostly offering options. So if someone doesn't know what they want, my first response is to say, here's a couple options about what it could sound like, and which one of those appeals to you the most. And so again, instead of trying to impose what I would maybe think of as the quote best sound for something, I am trying to offer ideas of what it would be and then letting the student decide. And there's a caveat to that, though, because sometimes I'm working with a client who has a callback for a musical that is a national tour or whatever, that is a very specific sound. And so in that case, we're both looking at meeting the needs of somebody else. We're looking at meeting the needs of a producer, probably. And so if I'm like, I did a lot of coaching on Six, the musical this year, and that's a very specific sound. Each one of those queens has a very specific pop sound built around, meant to sound like a Beyonce or an Adele or a Sia. And so that's a different thing, because then we're working together for a very specific tonal outcome based on the needs of a product versus someone's personal needs on their own vocal creation. So it all depends on what the goal is. But I think the thing that you're talking about and the thing that I'm talking about is that there's a conversation between the teacher and the student about what the goal is, and it's no longer an imposed goal from the teacher to the student, because I think we've discovered that that doesn't work very well, particularly in singing, which is so personal. Your voice is as unique to you as your thumbprint. And so how can we say that one thing, one tonal outcome is the only way to do things, particularly in commercial and contemporary styles like I'm teaching, right? In classical, there's maybe a bit more of a focus on what the tonal outcome should be, but in commercial music, it's the Wild West. You can sing however you like, and you will find an audience for that, right? We don't all, like, I have debates about Taylor Swift's voice and Billie Eilish's voice all the time, because I'm a fan and think those are amazing voices for what they do. And some of my colleagues struggle to understand that because for them, it's maybe not the most pleasing sound, but it has nothing to do with what we think is pleasing and only to do with what the artist thinks is pleasing and what their fans think of it.
That conversational aspect and that sort of like trying to understand context and things like that, rather than just going, there's a blanket answer for those things, I think is important for all kinds of teachers. And I want to sort of jump back and sort of ask you about sort of your educational journey and maybe sort of when you first started singing, because you said it was a passion and clearly it's driven a lot of like what you do. So where did that sort of like start for you?
Well, I grew up in a Mennonite household with a Mennonite mom who was a recreational piano player and a pretty strong harmony singer. So in my life, we sang at every holiday. My family gatherings had four-part harmony happening for Christmas carols and things like that. And so I really thought that was normal up until maybe grade 2 or 3 when I began to realize that that wasn't really as common as I would have expected. So I sang for like throughout my life. It was my grandparents, my opa played guitar, both my uncles played guitar. So music and instruments were always kind of around my life. I didn't actually have formal voice training until I was 16, and I had to earn it with grades. So my parents used it as a tool. I really wanted lessons, and I had to keep a certain mark in order to have them. And I ended up with a voice teacher named Lila McCormick. I grew up in British Columbia, and she was sort of the most well-revered voice teacher in my area. And she had mostly classical and musical theater training, so that is what I did. So I trained classically from age 16 up until my first 2 years of university. And I sang pop and musical theater kind of outside of that recreationally. Like I have some really hilarious memories of booking a practice room in my first year of university, intending to practice this Handel aria that I was supposed to, but I was too busy breaking down Mariah Carey riffs. So I think that was an indicator to me that I wasn't really in the right genre for what my passions were. But I'm grateful for that classical training. I think it informs a lot for me. It gave me a lot of experience. So I sang and did a lot of theater in high school. I'm very lucky that I went to high school in the 90s in a area that was very arts focused. And so my high school did 2 shows a year, a musical in the fall and a Shakespeare in the spring. So by the time, and in British Columbia at that time, grade 8 was part of high school. So I had 5 years of 2 shows a year. So by the time I graduated high school, I had done 10 shows. And that was really good experience for me. I had lots of chances to be an actor and learn from my high school teacher. And I did some community theater. And so by the time I went to university, it was for classical music. And I spent 2 years in a program and ultimately realized that it was not a fit for me because classical music was probably not going to be a fit for me. And so I quit after my second year and moved to New York City. And this was like the type of personality I was and probably still am, just a bit of a risk taker personality. My parents were like, oh, okay, I guess you're going to move to New York. I got a job working as an assistant at Richard Frankel Productions, which was a Broadway production company. And so I basically did like a Girl Friday job for a year and a half. And that was really great business education. I will never forget, there was about 8 interns in my program. It was an internship program. I lived in Brooklyn and took the train into Manhattan. And all the interns were assigned to different shows. And I really wanted to be assigned to the revival of Sound of Music, but I didn't get that job. Instead, I got assigned to a brand new musical, and I was a bit disappointed because I'd never heard of it, but it was The Producers. So I was in the room and in development while Susan Stroman and Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick, and then we're in rehearsal for that. I was in the production office helping that be developed at the lowest administrative level, but being a fly on the wall and learning all about theater and how business is built and how marketing works and how those decisions are made. And I praise that company because they let the interns be in on almost every big meeting. So everything from looking at costume designs to understanding marketing plans, we got to either be involved at the lowest level or observe it. And so I learned a lot working there for that time. And then I right as I left New York, I kind of got to work at the beginning of the development of Hairspray. So between those two shows, I just lucked out and was able to gain all this incredible knowledge while running all over New York City, fetching things and picking things up and learning from people who were amazing at their jobs. And so that was formative experience that taught me a lot about business and taught me a lot about work ethic, because as you can imagine, in a Broadway office, the demand for being focused and being diligent is pretty high. So that I had a very tough boss that I, respect deeply to this day, because she had a very high standard, and she taught me a lot about the basics of marketing. So when I came back to Canada, I did some community theater and then ended up at the Canadian College of Performing Arts doing a 2-year music theater diploma. And when I finished that, I worked for a couple of years as an artist, a musical theater performer, and eventually moved out here to Ontario to finish my degree at the University of Waterloo, because they were willing to accept some of my credits from the past and drop me right into third year. And so I lucked out. I was looking for a university that was going to take some of my past credits. And Waterloo just happened to have at the time a cultural management program. So I finished off my music degree and got some business classes in as well. And when I graduated from UW, I lucked out in that I was in a show for Drayton, and a job opened up in the marketing department there. And I started as a marketing assistant in 2006. And then within about 7 or 8 years, I was the director of marketing. And so that during that time, I taught voice and sang and performed outside of my job. And we started Glee in 2010. So things were happening outside of that job that still made me have a very well-rounded world. But eventually I got to the point where so many things were happening outside of my job that it became impossible for me to be two people. And I was working truly like 16 to 18 hours a day on the regular, and that was unsustainable. And I ended up having to make a decision. And so I exited my job, which was very hard because I did love it. Marketing shows is super fun. It's not like marketing widgets. Every show has its own branding around it. And one of my jobs was to create the artwork for it and to work with graphics and like all that kind of creative stuff, coming up with taglines and descriptions for shows and promoting artists and booking interviews and all that kind of stuff. So that was really fun for me. I found it to be exciting work. And so it was really difficult for me to say, I've done this job, I could do it for a lot longer. But I think what ultimately came down to for me is that I had kind of left my songwriting and singing behind for about a decade and been solely a teacher. And when I decided I wanted to go back to singing and writing, I realized that there was no way I was going to be able to do that and teach and work for Drayton. And so I literally, I basically had a conversation with my bosses at Drayton, whom I still have a great relationship with, and said, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to quit my steady day job to be an artist. And surprisingly, surprising probably to many, but not surprisingly to me, they were pretty supportive, because I think they knew that I had all these balls in the air outside of work, and that it just seemed like a natural next step for me to go in a different direction.
That's a wonderful picture of sort of like the way careers surprise you, especially in music, and the way things can like change and evolve, and how, because like going from like, I'm going to be a classical singer to now I'm working as assistant in musical theater to now I'm going back and I'm doing some of that and now I'm going to school, and like all those different like stages is sort of one of the things that I think a lot of people who are interested in music go, it's like, well, if I'm not here at this point and I haven't figured it out, it's over. There's no world. But That's not
Absolutely.
true, and
Not
no
true.
musician I've known has actually experienced that in their life. So I think it's always really good when I do interviews like this, or just like meet people in life, to like hear that, because it's a good reassurance on my end. But also it's really good that we get to like share the stories of people who have had such like a career, because it went from like, you were like, I'm going to do music as a career, and you have consistently done that in just varying different ways sort of throughout the entire time, which I think, and it's so cool to see those kind of different pathways you can pull. Business minors are great. I
Business
can't believe I'm
minors are
advocating
great.
for that, but
They,
business
they,
minors are great.
they are.
It's a good call.
I also think like there's a lot to be said for like a really zigzaggy path. Like one year you're doing something that seems like totally the right path, and you're right. Something comes along that completely changes that. And so I think at the time, like I wouldn't say until this last maybe 2 years, I've had really any perspective on that journey, because the journey felt very chaotic, and it did often feel like, what am I doing? Am I a marketer or a singer? Am I an artistic director or a business person? What is my, and I'm 43 now, and I have come to understand that I'm all those things, and that's awesome. Part of the reason why I'm capable of having such perspective is that I look at a problem now, or in any situation, from so many different angles. You know, I can appreciate the perspective of a producer. I can appreciate the perspective of a person auditioning, walking in with feeling like they have no power. So for me, being able to look at everything from multiple angles, I believe is an asset.
No, it's a really, that sort of breadth of experience, I think, is always really valuable, for sort of anybody, but especially in music. It makes you better at working with people too, is the thing that I found. And the one thing I sort of wanted to ask you is, you've had such like a long kind of pathway, like in terms of how diverse it is and how much sort of up and down changes you've experienced. But how do you have any sort of like career highlights that you could like pluck out and go, oh, that's the thing that I was like, that's something I'm really proud of, or that was really cool?
That's such an interesting question. I mean, what I would say I'm most proud of is the big hard lessons I've learned. The first year that I became a manager at Drayton, so I went from being managed to having a team of 6. I would say that my first year as a manager, I made every management mistake possible. I expected the people who worked for me to think like me and to have the same work ethic as me, because I was a workhorse and I would stay as late as it took to get something done. So, and at the end of my first year of management, I remember looking around and thinking, I don't think my staff like me that much. And what I am like most proud of is that instead of saying, what's wrong with the staff, I actually said, what's wrong with the leader? What's going on here? And that is a self-reflectiveness that I think I've applied to almost every area of my life. If there's a commonality in that people are unhappy, I generally look at myself first and say, what could I be doing differently? How could I set up this space differently? How is the structure preventing people from being happy or doing their jobs? And so after that first year of management, I basically sent myself to management school. I bought every management book out there and read it and did some deep self-reflection and completely changed the way that I interacted with people who worked with me. And I began to realize that there are so many different ways to lead, and that people require individualized leadership approaches. And so I have taken that from my management life into my teaching life. And I am most proud of the fact that I am capable of looking at a scenario and being honest with myself about whether or not I am contributing to an issue, or whether I have actually done my best to create a scenario where someone can succeed. And that still happens. I'm hyper attuned to it now that I've done all this research. But there are many times that I come away from a situation and go, what could I have done differently here that would have made this better? Or how could I change this moving forward? And I'll use my class at Laurier as an example. Like, it's a new class. It only started to be offered last year. And I do a lot of surveying of my class to find out how they're feeling. And I take it as a I take it as a feather in my cap that people are willing to tell me what they don't like, because that means they trust me not to penalize them for telling me that. And I take that's hugely, hugely proud of that, because we want to be able to express, and they do so in a respectful way. So it's not like they're being rude, but they're being honest about how they feel, what could be done differently. And if the people you work with are capable of telling you what they would like done differently, that means that they trust you to make changes for the betterment of the class without penalizing them. And I would say I'm most proud of the fact that in most spaces, I believe the people I lead trust me enough to tell me when things are not working.
I think that's a really like important part of teaching generally as well. Like, the moments I have the best when the kids are like, I hate what I'm doing, and I'm like, okay, so how do we get some of the knowledge, because I'm teaching a lot of fundamental musical skills of like, this is how you read what an A looks like, kind of thing, while still making it something that you enjoy. And also, but the best bosses I've had have been people like that, where they're like, yeah, so what do I change? And then the change actually happens.
Right.
And that's sort of a big like, it's not just there is that sort of like being able to feel like you can tell them, but then also that gets sort of positive feedback looped when that change actually happens, or when you notice that they've engaged, or when they actually engage with that feedback. And that's something that I always really appreciate. Not that I spend my whole life trying to find problems with the places I work at, but just so you know.
Yeah.
But
no, I mean, I think we all have
it's a
things.
really wonderful sort of trust thing.
Yeah, we all have things where we're like, and sometimes you're able to say to people, here's why that's happening. Here's why this is structured in this way. And sometimes people just need an explanation for why something is structured that way. And because sometimes it's out of our control, right? I work in spaces where I don't necessarily have complete control over how something is structured. And as long as people are aware of why, sometimes it's easier for them to understand. I mean, in terms of like career highlights that are personal to me, I would say, like last year, this year, February of this year, I put out a song called Slow Dance. And before I put the song out, I mean, all of us artists put our songs on DSPs, so digital streaming platforms. But I also sometimes send songs to radio for consideration. And it's not every song, but it depends on the song, because there's a whole thing I could get into about how expensive it is to send something to radio. You really have to believe in it to risk the money. It's a bit like Russian roulette. And a lot of people had given me feedback that like it was an awesome song, but that it was too slow for radio and I probably shouldn't waste the money on it. And I had this nagging feeling that I should send it to radio. Because I really felt it represented me very strongly as an artist. And I had a couple friends who backed me up on that. And then I did send it, and it was picked up right away and ended up spinning for a lot of months. And then it was number one on SiriusXM for a little while. And so if I had not trusted my gut, if I had listened to people who were following the industry template, I would never have sent it, and that never would have happened to me. And that helped open some doors for me as an artist that I would not have had otherwise. And so it was a lesson for me. I really try to trust my gut, but I also pay attention to industry trends. I'm a data analyst. I look at things. And so I try to be very pragmatic about how I spend my money, and I'm careful as a business person. And so it's a real dance for me to trust my gut and to watch the numbers. And so in this case, I basically said, I don't care what the numbers are. My gut says I'm going to send this. And if I lose X number of dollars, oh, well, it's a lesson. And so I'm really proud of the fact that I trusted myself. And also it was a really awesome moment to wake up on a Sunday morning and see my name on the top of that list. it started at number 8 and Shania Twain was at the top, and that was cool to be on a list with her. And then to end up in that top spot even briefly was just a nice little moment. I mean, I'm again 43 and an indie artist, so to have that happen to me was just a nice little moment. It was really fun.
That sort of like trust your gut aspect is something that is very hard for a lot of people, especially honestly a lot of musicians, I think, because we're that critical thinking aspect and that sort of like being considerate and like trying to meet the what they want sort of idea, either the audience or like the person who you're auditioning for. Those kind of thing, I think, is kind of built into a lot of how we're like educated, and sort of trusting your gut to go like left instead of this way can be very, depending on how you've like sort of learned and been engaged with music, can be very hard. And the people who tend to do it, I think, are often like there's a lot of good things about that sort of thing. The idea of doing an entire Christmas cover in G half sharp major is something I don't think anybody told Jacob Collier to do, but he
Right.
did. And now look at where we're at.
He's a great example of
that just
someone
came up on
who's
my YouTube,
who's
which is
gone
why it's in my
rogue.
head.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just does whatever he sort of wants to do, and it's really worked out for him. And he's also seems like a really nice person, which I think is a big aspect of that. But from that sort of like education thing, for you, you've had sort of a very wide range of education, either during work experience or in school. So what would you say if you could sort of like put it all, not all together, but come up with something that you think is you want to get across? Why is music education important?
I think it fuels a couple of things. I think it is fueling creativity, which spills over into many other aspects of business. And so if I weren't a singer, my creativity in my marketing work would not have been the same. So I feel that my study of music helped me to be creative as a business person. And I just happened to be marketing something that was musical, but I believe that I could have taken those marketing skills to any company and been the same level of creative because my brain is just wired to think of things in a different way. So creativity is a big one. I also think it has this great self-regulating emotional aspect. You know, music is so good for us from a mental health standpoint, and with all the stressors that people experience at every age of life, I think the more people that have music or music training in their life, the more they're capable of helping themselves cope with certain things. Music is a huge refuge for me in times of mental health stress. And I think it's the same for people who don't even consider themselves musicians. I mean, there's lots and lots of data out there about how music helps us and how art helps us. I mean, we had this discussion kind of at the forefront during 2020 when people couldn't do anything and felt that entertainment was the thing that was keeping them happy. And it, if anything, helped us to look at the value of that. We still struggle for people to see the value of going to school for music because people are afraid of direct job outcomes. But I can tell you that I know tons of friends who went to school for musical theater and then ended up in completely different careers where their creativity served them very well. One of the creators of the fashion line, Frank and Oak, was in my class at musical theater school. And I don't think he would have had the same success or creativity had he not been musical and had that musical training in the background. There's something to be said for how freeing that environment is and how it allows you to build neural pathways in ways that are not limited or not structured. The lack of structure in some elements of music training is super important. And then on the flip side of that, there's a lot of structure in music. So I would say that music education has a great balance between discipline and structure and creativity and free thought. So that balance of things really helps people.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. It's sort of because it is that sort of, we tend to think of those as like binaries of like you can have one on one and one on the other, and there's no, you're one of the two things. But music does sort of drift in this sort of weird place where it does all things just in the same way. It's sort of a mind body experience where your brain's working just as hard as your body's working, and they have to be like in great sync. And that's sort of something that I have become to value more as I'm like teaching younger kids of going, it's not you're not smart and it's not you're not good at piano. It's getting your brain and your body to be on the same page can sometimes be really tricky, especially with physically dexterous things like piano. The amount of times I hear a kid do it right and then the next time they just get it completely wrong. And it's
the same with singing. Your instrument is inside your body, so you can't even see it. And so one day you're having a good day because you're feeling good and you've slept well and your body's feeling good, and then you're able to coordinate your folds in a way and your breath and everything. And then the next day, nothing happens. So it's totally the same. But that's life. I mean, we have bad days in any job, right? So I think you're totally right about the mind body connection that comes with studying music. I also think music shows us in its performance how different it can be for each person. I mean, we've heard 1,000 versions of Ave Maria, for example, but nobody sings it exactly the same way. The notes and the rhythms may be the same, but the articulation of it is different. And so there's creativity inside the structure, and that tool, is uniquely taught in music.
I think it's really important to highlight those things, especially because it helps, I think, give younger people who are trying to figure out why music's important to them a framework of like, or why it works for them or why they might be interested in doing it, a framework of like, well, this is sort of what I'm experiencing, and sort of an understanding of like, oh, I am getting that sort of structure, but I also feel like it's creative, and trying not seeing those things as like an internal cognitive dissonance. That's the word I was looking for. But for you, as someone who's had this sort of very career pathway and has sort of like this experience as a teacher, this experience as like in university instructor, which is a different kind of teaching from like private teaching. Do you have any advice to young musicians who are maybe interested in music or in doing some of the things that you do specifically?
I have like two things. It's okay to suck. In fact, I suck at a lot of things. And I work on a lot of things that I suck at. And I actually think failing is awesome. So one of the reasons I think that I have had such a variety is that I'm not afraid to try new things, even if I think I'm going to be really bad at it. I encourage people to make a list of all the things they wish they could do and to try them all in short stages and see what sticks, and that to work through the stuff that's hard. I am a really bad piano player, but I continue to play. I'm a really bad guitar player and I continue to play. I've gotten great as a singer, I think, because I've spent thousands of hours on it. A lot of people talk about like natural talent or whatever, and I had some natural talent, but very little. Like truly, I've had to work on almost every skill that I have. I still take lessons from the occasional teacher. If I meet someone who's an amazing teacher at a conference, 9 times out of 10, I'm booking a session with them so that I can see how they teach. I really don't have a lot of ego, I think, hopefully. I walk into every space and go, who can I learn from? I'm trying to suck up knowledge in every space that I'm in. And so there's a real humility in that. I think I have a lot to teach others, but I also think I have a lot to learn. And so every time I meet someone, regardless of their age, I'm having conversations with people and thinking about what I can learn from them. I learn from my students all the time. My students teach me what's current. I'm not cool. I don't know I don't know what's cool unless they help me figure that out. And so I think trying as much as possible to take ego out of the mix and to be constantly learning in whatever space you're in, and to be totally okay with being bad at things until you're good at them is probably my 2 big pieces of advice. My students see me try to play piano in lessons or classes all the time, and I'm sure they roll their eyes at how much I'm bad at it. But you know what? It's a necessary evil for what I have to do. I'm getting better at it all the time. I'm there because I'm a voice person, not because I'm a pianist, and it's part of what I have to do, and so I work on getting better at it. But I've released the fact that there's for sure in every space that I'm in is a better piano player than me, and that's cool, and that's okay. Failure is sweet, is awesome, it's a teacher. and learning from everyone you know, because you have no idea what someone has to teach you. And I mean that from other businesses. When I just meet someone new that is in a completely different business than me, I have meaningful conversations about what they do, because I might learn something about how they do it that might apply to my work.
I think that sort of lifelong learning aspect is another big thing that I think comes up in music. It's one of the intimidating things I think when you're a young person is there's no ceiling in because there's a million different things you could know. It's sort of like we got better and now you can do this really easily. And here's a harder version of Jingle Bells. I did this to a kid this week. I was like, here's the version you learned last year, and here's the harder one. And they were like, what? They handled it great because they're that kind of person of like just take on the challenge. I also agree. I wasn't cool when I was my student's age, so I don't know why I would know what's going on now.
Right.
But I think that's really that sort of like being willing and open to fail. I had a teacher when you were talking about that. I had a teacher. My first real music of I want to kind of maybe I really like this, and this is more than just the piano lessons I take on the side. Was my middle school music teacher, and I'm gonna sort of butcher what she said because I don't know which order she said it. But it was be wrong and be strong was her sort of advice. So she'd rather you play the wrong note as loudly as possible because at least then you're getting the note out and she can tell you that's wrong, do it like this because we're trying to play a piece as a band instead of trying to hide it. And I think that was a really, she did make me stop singing choir a couple times. No, she did. But I wanted it. I did because I was like, I can't sing that in the moment. But she, that was a big influence on like my thinking when I go into teaching. And it's very hard to get across to students because that's not how they're sort of taught to think. It's about getting things right. As much as our education system is less like that than it used to be, definitely less than like that than when I was a kid. I think that's a lesson that I really want to impart on a lot of them, and I think it's really important for kind of everyone to learn, not even just like musicians and young people. I think it's something that you can. It gets harder to be wrong as you get older.
There's also different scenarios of getting
Yeah.
it right, right? Like in your private exploration as an artist, there is no such thing as right, really, unless you have a specific idea about how you want to sound and you're not there yet, right? So that is your own meter of what right is. The hard part in classes is that we are meeting criteria set by someone else. And so as long as the instructor is creating a funnel, and I use this marketing tool whenever I'm teaching, but my job in a class is to create a funnel and help my students go down the funnel. You know, like in the class I teach at Laurier, there are many different types of sounds explored. It's all commercial music, but we're maybe exploring what a Billie Eilish type sound is. Well, that's different criteria than if I'm teaching a Stevie Wonder or a Marvin Gaye type piece. And so in that case, I'm giving them specific criteria of what the sound is, and their job is to play with their own voice to try and find what that sound might be. And then as a group, we're trying to make that sound together. So there is a bit of a right and a wrong there because there's a sound, a style that we're going for. What fits the style? Now, if you're on your own, you can decide whether or not you want to go toward the style or against it. You know, when I'm teaching other teachers, I use this great example of there's a Billie Eilish song called My Future, and the opening line is, I can't seem to focus. And there's a lot of air in the sound. And I usually show them, like, what if I did that as Mary Poppins? I can't seem to focus and I don't seem to notice. That's a different style. It's not necessarily wrong. It's just not as close to what the recording is. And so being able as a singer, in my case, to change what I'm doing to fit the style is all that I'm trying to impart to my students. What are the options? And then if you're an artist and you're creating your own music, you get to decide which tool that you use. But if you're walking into a musical where you're working with a director, they're going to give you the style that they want. And then hopefully you will have the tools inside of you to say, oh, I got to pull on this tool and this tool and this tool in order to create that sound.
I think that toolbox thing is a really important thing. I try like to impart on people is like you're giving you as much as possible so you can pick what you actually like to do. My goal in teaching, and this is partially because I don't think I'm necessarily the best pianist, and I know there's kids who I will have to send to a better teacher, like a teacher who can play the stuff they need to be playing. But my goal is that not necessarily I produce the best piano players in the world. It's that I produce people who want to keep playing piano and want to keep doing music their whole life, and I don't scar them to avoid it for the rest of their life, which I know a lot of people who will never pick up piano again because they're like, I was bad at it and my teacher thought I was dumb. And I'm like, that's not my goal. That's the opposite.
That's a great goal to have, though.
It's worked so far. None of them hate me, though some have left because they need a better piano teacher. That thank you so much for all the sort of advice and like thoughts. It's been great to like sort of talk about this kind of like teaching stuff and all these different experiences that you've had. And to be honest, you said like learning. I feel like I've learned a lot just like talking to you from that kind of thing, which
That's
I
cool.
always love about these interviews. That's something that I go in with, like I go into these, I'm like, I'm gonna hear things that I've never thought of. But we're gonna shift out of some of the, heavy thinking stuff into speed thinking. It's because we're going to do our fast five questions, which are sort of fun, get to know you questions. Some about music, some not about music. Well, just things that you're, off the dome kind of questions. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Cool. First question is favorite movie soundtrack.
Lion King. I love the movie. I love all the songs in the movie, and I love all the incidental music on that soundtrack. I think it does an incredible job of supporting the story, and I just think it lives on to this day because it is so compelling.
Yeah, no, that's a really great one. Obviously, you're a singer. Question 2 is what instrument / thing do you wish you played?
I wish I was a better guitar player. I play acoustic a little bit, but if I could shred on electric, I'd be thrilled.
Yeah, same. And I play guitar for half of my job. So this is one I always find, this third question is one I always find tricky for musicians, because it's what's your hidden talent? And a lot of responses I get is, well, I did that. I had one and then I did it for my job. But outside of sort of the singing aspect, or maybe as a thing people don't know about that part of your life, what's a hidden talent that you have?
I'm a great event organizer, and that has served me well in my job, but I've produced my own concerts because I know how to run an event and build a budget and like those skills that we've talked about, like I would say that's a hidden talent. People have no idea how easy it is for me. It would be hard for some people to do that, and for me, I could drop a budget in together and prep an event in about 2 hours.
Yeah, that I can't do that. I'm envious of that skill. So the now moving away from that kind of music related stuff, if you could live anywhere, where would it be?
Three places, really. I mean, I'm a huge New York fan because I've lived there, but I love London. I love the city of London. I'm a huge fan of the vibe in the UK. I visited there a bunch and I really love it. And I also love Paris, France. So I've been there a bunch, and I'm a fan of the food and the vibe. Like if I'm in a laissez-faire mood and I want to have a bit more of a chill of a life, I'm thinking about Paris. And if I want to be in the hustle and bustle of a city, it's either London or New York. I'm a very cosmopolitan personality. You will not see me wanting to live on a beach anywhere.
That is fair. I would get really sunburned if I lived on a beach, so that's
Me
also not a
too.
thing that I can do. California seems great, scares me. I'm like, I'm gonna be just red all the time. And the last sort of one of our fast quiet questions is, what's the last show you binge watched, or last book you read and got really into, last movie series, that kind of thing?
The last series that I'm in the middle of binge watching is the Gilded Age, so I'm like a big fan of that. Also, Handmaid's Tale. I don't watch TV very much, but when I do, it tends to be a scripted drama-based series. I'll probably watch the morning show over the holidays because I have it on my list, but like I'm not a reality TV person, so it's usually got to be a scripted something. But again, I don't watch a lot of TV. I'm out at shows more often than I'm watching television.
What's the last show you watched?
I went to see Chris Misses, which is a musical in Toronto last weekend, And the weekend before that, I saw Fiddler in Cambridge. And so I see a lot of musical theater, but I also go to a lot of concerts and just indie shows because I'm usually either watching students or hear about something and I want to go see what the music is like. So I'm more likely to be a live show than in front of a television.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today and answer all our questions. Last thing, sort of let it want to know is your chance to sort of tell us what you got coming up. Obviously, the holidays are coming up, so it's a big concert season for a lot of people. And also, we're heading into the new year. So for you, what's something you got going on?
Well, I just put out a record. So I have a record called The Good Fight that just came out in November. And I'm still promoting that and still doing shows around it. So that's exciting for me. This is a record that I wrote after being kind of dormant as an artist for 10 years. So it feels really extra special and meaningful. So that I'm about to kind of go into promotion of my song called The Good Fight. So if I would ask if anybody cares about indie artists, please go listen to that song. It's on all my streaming platforms. And then I'm just going into a bunch of like shows and concerts in 2024. So I'm prepping my voice. I'm doing a lot of stamina work now personally to get ready for all the shows that I'm going to have coming up in the new year.
Nice. Awesome. I will add that to my list, my never
Thank
ending
you.
list of songs I need to listen to, but it'll go up high. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. It's been really great to learn about you, learn a lot from you during the course of the interview. Thank you guys for listening. As always, if you're listening to this, we also have this available on YouTube. And if you're watching this, it's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. So you can watch it and listen to it twice. That would be also fun for us personally. I don't know if it'd be fun for you, but it'd be fun for us. But thank you so much. Thank you again, Amanda, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. If you like what you heard, you can learn more about our organization at bandology.ca, which features information about music education, advocacy and research, and our Play a Gig and Bandcamp programs. Follow us on social media for more videos, performance, and interviews on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.